Hey, what's up? Skillshot04 here. Rainbow Six Siege is a very complicated game and it has a very steep learning curve, which means it can be really difficult to get into as a new player. So today I'm going to be sharing with you guys my 25 tips for new players. In my last video, I talked about my top 5 beginner tips for improving, which is how you're going to improve as a new player, but this video is on things you should know as a new player. The first tip I have for you guys is don't reinforce next to someone else. It's very inefficient, it wastes time, and it can be very frustrating. So if you reinforce one wall and someone else reinforces right next to you, you're going to have to run to a different part of the site to try and find a spot for that second reinforcement. So my next tip is to save your prep phase drone. A lot of new players, when the prep phase starts, will move the drone into sight and try to spot people and find out where the bomb is. And most of the time you're going to lose your drone that way. And your drone is one of your most valuable assets. So when you're droning out in the prep phase, position your drone in the spot that you're going to be entering from in the action phase. That way you can drone out the room. It's going to save time and it's going to allow you to use your drone later on, and you're just not going to be destroyed at the very beginning of the round. The next tip I have is to never reinforce between sites. So when you're defending in a site, normally you're going to want to blow a hole in between the two sites, so that way you can have lines of sight into them and you can rotate between those two sites if you have to. If you reinforce, it blocks off these rotations and these lines of sight, which is going to make it a lot harder to defend. So make sure that when you're placing your reinforcements, they're not in between sites and they're not going to block off rotations and lines of sight. Alright, now for those of you that have been playing a little bit longer and maybe even have started playing ranked, I would recommend trying a strategy or a method out in custom game or casual before you try it in ranked. Don't go experimenting a whole lot in ranked. Sometimes it can benefit you, but sometimes it can be really harmful. If you have an idea, remember that idea and go into a custom game or just try it in casual. So my next tip is to remember all the camera positions on all the maps. This will really help you as a defender because when you're trying to view a certain spot of the map, you know exactly where to go on your cameras to find it. When you're attacking, you're going to want to remember where the camera positions are. That way you can shoot them out and deny that intel to defenders. Lastly, if you learn the positions of the cameras, you can see which cameras are shot out, which tells you where the attackers are coming from. So my next tip is to not rappel straight up on a window, because when you rappel in this manner, the defenders are going to be able to see the rappel cable and they're going to know exactly when they're coming from, and they can just pre-fire and easily kill you. Instead, when you're rappelling, go to the side of the window and rappel out that way. That way the defenders don't know where you are and it's going to be a lot harder for them to kill you. The next tip I have is to not pick outside on the fence. When you're a more experienced player, you can mess around with this and maybe get some kills, but when you're a new player and you don't know the map so well, it's really dangerous. Normally the attackers are going to have ACOGs and they're going to be holding long lines of sight and you're not going to be able to see them. So my next tip is on defense, you're going to want to waste time and run the clock down. The attackers are the ones that have to be aggressive and come to you. They have to get the plant down, they have to get the kills. If you can play time and run out the clock, you automatically win. So when you're on defense, do whatever you can to keep them distracted and busy trying to take you out, and they may forget about the clock or they may run out of time and they won't be able to plant. Whenever you have just a couple of seconds left and you know they're not planting, just run away. Don't take any gunfights because you're going to be able to win the round. So my next tip is on attacking side, you're going to want to be a lot more aggressive than on defense. It's very easy for new players to be afraid of being aggressive because they don't know the maps and they don't know the positions. Now when I say aggressive, I don't mean neglecting to drone or not clearing everything out. I mean don't sit in one spot and hold an angle hoping defender is going to peek you. You have to move in and you have to be aggressive in order to make something happen. My next tip is to watch when you shoot drones. New players especially can kind of go into a little bit of a frenzy trying to hit a drone and they cannot hit it and they'll shoot all over the place. Be careful when you're trying to shoot the drone that you're not shooting your teammates because they're not going to appreciate that. So my next tip is on defense. When you're using impact grenades, make sure you let your teammates know where you're impacting, because if you're standing next to a wall when it gets impacted, you're going to take a fair amount of damage and sometimes your teammates can get quite mad at you. So on defense, when you see an enemy on cameras, don't ping where they are. Instead, use callouts. Tell your teammates where they are. If you ping them, they're going to know that they're being spotted. They're going to look around for the camera and they're going to shoot it out. This is especially important on Valkyrie camps because whoever's playing Valkyrie will not appreciate it if the camera gets destroyed. My next tip is on attack, if you have diffuser, don't wander away from objective. Always play with your team if you have diffuser, because if they take sight, they're not going to be able to plant. And if you die with diffuser, your teammates are going to have to go to wherever you died and try to pick that diffuser up. Sometimes that can be really difficult to do and it can cost the entire round. So always play objective when you're the one carrying the diffuser and stick with your team. Next, don't waste your breaching charges on barricades. Whether these be Ashe's breaching charges or Sophia's breaching charges or just the regular secondary gadget breaching charges that attackers can bring, always use them on soft walls. It's a waste to use them on barricades. So my next tip is to never use laser sight. If you have laser sight equipped, attackers are going to be able to see it on the wall or on an object, and they're going to know exactly where you are and they can just jump in and pre-fire you. The next tip I have for you guys is to place a claymore so that only one laser shows. A lot of new players will just throw a claymore down and they won't pay attention to the positioning and it'll have 2 or 3 lasers, which is a lot easier to spot than if you were to angle the claymore and only show 1 laser. This is going to allow you to get a lot more claymore kills. It's going to be a lot harder to spot and it's a better method of placing a claymore. Alright, so the next tip I have for you guys is a really big and important one, and that is to use communication. Communication is so important in Rainbow Six Siege. Whenever you see an enemy or whenever you see something going on, call it out, ping it, let your teammates know. The more you communicate, the better your team coordination is going to be, and you're going to win a lot more rounds because of that. So when you're attacking, make sure you pay attention to how much time there is left on the clock. Don't waste a lot of time trying to get rid of roamers or killing other players if there's not a lot of time left. If you try to fake the diffuser and then go for a kill and you don't have any time left, you're going to lose. So just make sure that you have plenty of time to do whatever you need to do and get the diffuser down. The next tip is to not watch the same place or hold the same angle. So if you're watching a certain place and you're holding that angle, make sure that none of your teammates are holding the same angle because it's very inefficient and you're going to be able to cover much less ground. The next tip I have for you guys is to never go in blind as an attacker. A lot of new players, when they first start playing the game, will just rush into the building without droning out first and checking. You never know when a defender could be watching where you're entering, ready to kill you as soon as you enter. So always make sure you use your drone and clear it out first. So the next tip is to never barricade yourself in when you're playing on offense. A lot of new players will throw up barricades because they think it helps them out and is keeping them safe, but what this does is that it cuts you off from the rest of the map. If you need to back a teammate up or if you need to get to the diffuser because it's planted, it's going to take you a lot longer and it's going to alert the attackers to your presence because when you tear down a barricade, it makes a ton of noise. Alright, now when you're holding an angle, it's a lot harder for someone to see you and realize where you are if you're prone than if you're standing. If you stand up, you're going to be, or crouch, it's going to be a lot more noticeable. So when you're holding an angle, remember that you can always go prone. You're going to be a lot harder to spot and thus you have a higher likelihood of getting the kill before your enemy does. Alright, so my next tip for new players is to look for traps when you're going through the map. It's really easy to forget about traps and run right into them, but it's really important that you pay attention and try to find them. So look for Kapkan traps, they're going to be on doorways. Look for Elysian mines that are going to be on the ground and they have a little distortion. Look for frost traps, look for any sort of trap. Alright, so my next tip is to utilize your sound. Now a lot of actions make sound, such as running, walking, and getting on your camps. So if you can learn to recognize what sounds mean what, you can take advantage of it and get a lot of really easy kills. The very last tip I have for you guys is to not main an operator. You'll hear a lot of players talking about, I main this operator and I main this operator. Sometimes that can be a good idea because it allows you to get really good with a certain operator. But when you're a new player, you really need to learn how to play everyone and you need to be very versatile. So you're always going to want to try out all the operators that you can, mess around with them, learn how they all work, and learn how to play with them all. It's really going to help out your gameplay. Now before I end this video, I want to give a big shout out to my teammate who helped me get all the footage for this video. It took a long time, but hopefully it looks really nice. So that is it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I also hope that it taught you some things. I know as a new player it can be very difficult to get into this game, but I promise you that if you stick with it and take the time to learn it, it's going to be a very rewarding experience. It's a lot of fun to play. So if you did like the video, leave a like and subscribe, and leave a comment telling everyone what your personal top tips are for new players and how they can learn the game and how they can improve. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you next time.